We're writing it out right now.
We have two sweats going on. Yeah. Every stroke is not maybe no second. The log is too small. You had a smaller log. I had a smaller log and there was nothing. Right, so it would be easier. No, I want you to put it on the ground. That's some safe
Good morning. Hinapito ni Watsover. It's Gagi Pito stays that Hinapito Matsitana Noto. It's Moinotikiaski how. Good morning. It's 10:30 and my co-chair, my big brother here said we'll start at 10:30, so I don't want to make a liar out of him so early in the morning. So it's 10:30, 10:31, and we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to get an opening prayer before we go any further. So, okay, we're going to ask Mr. Quinney, Elder Quinney, to say the opening prayer for us. We can have your attention just for a few moments. Elder Hector Quinney is going to do the opening prayer for us. Is that what? If you want to try, if you want to try, not possible, not possible, It's not over 3D6. Turun sakit. Sakit betul sakit. Sakit kelihatan. Maka pokok. Dua di depan dalam wajah. Maka besar. Maka besar ke wahai wahai kata baru itu dah. Memang bisa semua. Maka baru kawan betul ya maka baru apa yang tahu itu tak apa apa itu kita bawa tadi tok kita apa saja itu orang saya itu nama Hai também dali kagis mustamoya mina katabi hono mina kite tiksi kau pas kona cek spagana kagis moche yang mamo kami kita magusia emang kamu kagis moko mamo uno kakyo kami opai kanai pai ai mano ka ini po ya ki wano kagis ka takai wak ikska tan circuito tago ya ko skituma osam itu tamo e ko gaiton ibano ka no te Viutsioagi tsugo magtaskino suiti ga monai piche suiti ga apo sweet scotch suiti nana tu si trata como digamos inoski sipia nanatokiwe, e kui mona kikiwe ko i utsioagi je. Maho e mantunita ke. Tansi ke misa asutamoa je. I tem no kayas. Utahuma. E wa nanas mo na kaksi. Kagis mo giska. Kapigis ke kagis mo tibo i tem no. I matutsu. Mina ubiko kami ituta ke. Maganiga no spagana. Good morning, everybody. Just thanking Elder Quinny for his beautiful prayer and his heartfelt prayer. No doubt he's thinking of all his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the relatives that are in need today. And it's many of our relatives are suffering today, not only because of government law, but also many things that are being brought to our land here that's making our people suffer. All kinds of drugs, the gang mentality and the gangs that are on our nations and surrounding our nations, many things. And I was thankful for the pipe ceremony that the elders did this morning too. And yesterday, all day was a day of prayer. They started with the pipes and the teepee, the prayer cloths, and also we had a sweat lodge, women and men. And then we had a feast remembering the ancestors of this place. And to me, it's still that way when I come here every year. I try to make it a point to come here. I've been coming here for many years. But you can feel the energy here, the power of the prayers that our ancestors left for us. And I think that's what keeps us going. Because there's many things that are happening right now. The federal government and provincial governments are really fast tracking their legislative agenda. So we have a lot to discuss today. Only thing, it's too bad there's not more leaders here today. And that's the state of affairs today too. Many young people don't realize how important this treaty is, the agreement that was entered into. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair to say a few words, and then we're going to ask Ogama Lewis to come up and say welcome to you, and then we'll take you through the agenda. And apologies for the late start, but we'll get it done. Now, AJ.
So this morning, I want to say hello, welcome one more time, in gathering in this very sacred ground, Fort Pitt. This is sacred ground for us. Our people met the government. They came by boat along the shore right here. The crown came by boat. And it was 147 years ago that they came up and camped here and met with our people from several tribes. They had finished 2 weeks prior to that, meeting several tribes at Fort Carlton. And then a week later, they met the Beardies, Nukamasses, and One Arrow on top of the hill near between Duck Lake and Fort Carlton. And then they moved on over here into this place. There are a number of meeting sites, treaty sites that we know From what the record shows, there's 18 different sites that Treaty 6 was signed on. 18 different sites. And it started in 1876, Fort Carlton, and Soto had their adhesion signed in 1954. So it took a while. I'm AJ Felix. I'm from Sturgeon Lake. I'm in the Scottsdale. We have several Scottsdale here. Treaty 6, we've been around for a long, long time. Some of us have been in the Treaty 6 movement for something like 45 years. And we've met, we've seen elders come to this gathering, old elders that helped us with the agenda, and now they're no longer with us, they're gone. But I want to say Ron Lehman from Alberta, Eric Catus is from the Battlefords, myself from the Prince Albert area, and of course Chief Lewis was in the Scottsdale here for many years as well. So we are the Scottsdale for Treaty 6, and we try to continue on. I know Montreal Lake is coming in with their Treaty 6 adhesion for Laurent and Peter Ballantyne Band and Montreal Lake. They are starting a treaty movement as well. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I said one of the points that I raised this morning, some of you weren't here, if there's a sweat that is required, a co-ed sweat this evening, please come and give your name forward to Vern here, that's sitting here. And if there are enough people that are interested in having a prayer sweat on this very serious commemorative day, 147 years after treaty signing in this very spot, you can have that sweat lodge here as well today. So with that, I'll turn it back to my brother, Ron, and he'll start the agenda right now. Hi.
AJ, and sorry I didn't introduce myself. Ron Lehman from Beaver Lake Cree Nation, treaty number 6. I'll say west. I don't like to recognize this boundary here. Alberta, Saskatchewan came way later, and my brother doesn't like it here, but I always say he's from the far east, and this is the Middle East, and we come from the west over there. So, and I see Eric is here already, so I'm going to ask Ogama Lewis to come and say his words of welcome. And again, really thank him and Onion Lake, the leaders of Onion Lake, Vern, for their commitment. They never waver in their commitment. And every year it's difficult for them, I can see it. And as we lead up to the 150-year anniversary, I think the work is going to get to be more and more. But I'll ask Ogama to come up on top.
Tamay,
Nanasku mun. Se minun pitää kiskau. Että se oli kuusia, kun mä rentin. Niin että mä ei tietoa. Että nanasku mun. Taksi hiivohti minuutin. Ja kismu kiskau. Hyvä meitä niin kannastaa, kun mä rentin. Hyvä mä kauin näitä makuja. Hyvä mä kauin paskiipäin. Umman kapaan muukin, mä muukin kapaan muukin. Evoksi näkyy just niin. Tattoo kikiään. Joku teit niistä näin tuhta muukin. Siinä mä viivottahtiin nyt katsot. Uskoa. Nyt näitä makuja. Ja kun mä näin tattoo muivat nuonskisen. No Charlie's from the late Morris Lewis. His last words, mä muistan, että tipuatti, siikämik, kauikats, näki uspoavan, että isuhtit. Ja sen joutsi jutuhtit. Uspoavan niitä muhtit, muikats, kaki saavui kounaan, kiitti. Minä itu sekali nova, kumakan nog, sagyakan nog. Sagot at muhtin gizi. Ibu manis ay sa sugi taman. Managipito ano, kikitin nog. Utagagit matsik. Karena ka swapya kilo, muy buta. Kaya ogibut kikipin. Muutan lagi, sige muita, ikan sige business tukta, pamatun. Magi wanistan anta tapap ya. Managat may tuan libuk. Kan siya pito manigo. Gipun tak nipun tapuk tanah nibuk kagi. Ikaw ito taka, lugibin. Magu may muy kumta kasi mo sa giskan na nas munta to ga punta puhti. Mams ko sige ya. Tanska gi mis mams swamo ya. Ay man mamukto ni wo mag unity at may kami komunya ay man. Maga karena tamagus na lo kaya ano ibang matapogi ka mo sa kapmaya ibang sapo tayo asko naitawan umatoy unigan istamagyo kataposti samsta iskon ganit na tinan katuskyon maga kistin P-vahvistin tegi monta puhtviigasta ja tegi muu piun, että saa tänne jo eni puhtauviis peigi. Hivu miivukka, mä viimuja miivaat. Puhuman antova, kui mä ei tutamak. Äski tuugi mä oon muiganek ju. Kui suu niivukka, mä saa puhtaat. Maganinan. Kapi ei muita monan, mui tihtinan unuvi suun. Moja. Magan kap meisna neitao. Mina kap sassilu iskundana. Tapuin ngati mujivi. Egina kamago si tapui pulitin tapan tukut askitu gimao. Usamos se. Igaga flit sama seksunio kakipi nama. Tas kujeks niistä nangi tuota unana kute. Musta me on maksimuun iskoa ajako. Gina nama unana seksunio. Maksud niistä kas kita katsi puhun gipin paisunan. Base ka na din. Gini ko na naman yung Sonia at itipit na. So may mais pa ito. Hindi bomba. Muy nanas ko binato ko na ko dagarunen katus kiyo. Katus kaharan na nebo uneba. Kunan tumas na mo ito ni sikis. Wani na nebo muy. Asko no kibito mo na. Iguma iskunda. Ata mo yesuna yung kisasta ang tayo sinina na kinsa buktat. Magigot at na nakasin niya kiba justice system. The enforcement kag nakasin niya. Tapos tayo yung kagisaksan na ito with 2012. Utang din isk sa mga nan. Kaya no. Iso ako. Tuwesuin no. Kaya no. Utang kiheo. Tanda tweet ko. XP initiation. Yun yun. Ligo na. Ginata mo ako. Okay. Asay minuma. Bilang ka, nine mambo, bilang ka, kita ko ito. Experience di paksimo ya. Even if mo niya o kag puliso o kag magtsahaya mo instrukta mo kaya no matsun no. Are weird right? Mo instrukta mo. So nagagi man siya kisig matisa na to bis na tamo na. Ano ska gisa ka kasay na. Diba ano sa kapin pa itato mag-governance, governance. Asay na, uli ko niyo, katabuti, matisa. Nanas kumaniyo tayo yung tabuti, sige ko nag-okay. O tiga din, snawad sa isip. Sir, meron katabuti. Kamera star blanket o tamin katabuti. Caroline Bucklow, tabuti. Florida P. Lambert, tabuti. Maguli at this next remote tayo ito. Janice Makokis. The one I need on me was our in-house legal meeting I gave on Phelan, along with our technical team of treaty team, Sharon General, Carla Vernon. Ito makanakasin niya was our justice system. As part of our conventional Oregon system, our leadership is an Oregon, part of our convention. Our elders council, part of our convention in Oregon. The third one, the most important component is the Judicial Commission. Ito makanagasin niya. Ito sa ito tumayak ko here. How we can establish our own justice systems, our own court. Scotland as Mavasiga First Nations police legislation list as hindi na nagawin naman po. Tantemri to federal legislation. Magibuniyog ang magkatiman sa kutaman. When it comes to unity, it was a kaima. Kamamopit to. Moreover, colors movement like treaties 1 to 11. But ayman. Once kagisa kaskita is mamupit to is pinigay, we cannot organize within our own treaty areas. Una pegoting dito not to undermine anybody's process, but we need to respect our own processes. I'm kind of leery of me, these was of the direction I was hearing.
Because my main purpose of heading to Winnipeg is presenting my own version of our own nationhood. Kaya no tansi gitmis migoya. Moreover, inherent rights. That's what we have before the treaty. And I'm talking about that sovereignty. A lot of us have our own interpretation of sovereignty. You go Magaita, and these are things that I need to mention. If you're part of a tribal council or organization, are you sovereign? That's what is, for example, as for myself. I say I'm sovereign because I represent this nation. I maintain that bilateral relationship with the government the way it's supposed to be. Whereas we're negotiating that funding bilaterally right from Treasury. If that can happen, wouldn't that solve most of the underfunding that we're experiencing in the Canadian country? The short version is yes. That would eliminate the government bureaucracy using our own money to operate your own department. 60% are utilized well. 21% other than 19% you would take the winner. Every First Nations, no wonder we're struggling all across. When you talk about challenging the government, the Bonavaita and Wally with the former chief this year was under their leadership, they challenged the government under Bill C-27. And we won that battle because of this Manusia, the ceremonies, ego, isohimaga. If we utilize our ceremonies, it's easy to feel how can we lose, especially if we have to faith on what you're doing. It's important to know that leadership know. Under that challenge 27, when we won that D90, we didn't really have to present our consolidated revenue, but we welcomed them to our nation to come and see our books. And at the time, we knew that's where we came out with some facts that were proven in court and there's public information. That ADM that at the time was asked under oath in court, these Indian monies of holding, the ones that you're withholding, he was asked, are these taxpayers' dollars? He was asked, and he said, these are Indian monies. So we're negotiating that those treaty monies, those are the monies that we're targeting. And they are worried. They are really worried if we go after them all at once. You know what will happen to them? They'll go bankrupt again. Because they took them Indian monies back in 1914, I think, or 12.
1912.
12. They put it all without our consent, they put it on their consolidated revenue. They want to get So these are things that we need to start utilizing. Because, under Indian Act, when the chiefs at the time negotiated and sat with the government, just one person, one chief that wasn't there, Chief Big Bear. He was the one that abstained from everything. He was the one that said, at the end when we agreed to treaty, he was the one that said, you're only putting the noose around your neck. And guess what? That's what happened all these years. It became words of the government. So they do things, they don't even have to ask us, they do things without our consent. But anyway, I'm rambling on too much. Besides, a lot of this will be discussed at Magananas kung and I'll end off with this Umota Disco when it comes to the spiritual component. Just to recap, 5 years ago, I started thinking about how much our young people are losing because the oral tradition has weakened to a point now that I asked the elders when we met that one day, can we start writing some things here from a snag so that our young people can understand and visualize what we're talking about? Kaya we guys got you mas na mo kapag mas ka na mo pag basta ko dahil may knowing that we have our own convention here, our constitution based on our convention. Soon as we touch stepping on where we're already within our constitution. So at the time, at the end of the day, when the meeting ended, the elders agreed, yeah, can maybe start writing some things down, not just real spiritual things, but some of these things that can be written down. Now that's come all. I was emotional at the time when we agreed to it. And I said before I start anything, I make a 4-year vow, a commitment to do a 4-year Sundance. If we may from I need to ask that grant permission for what we can start writing down. And I concluded my 4th year this summer. It's something very powerful that about Kakapi was spoken in Stotona. So with that, we're to a point now, with the advice of our legal team here and the Legal Ancestral War Society, Kapachihayako. We have to talk about that Gawista, how they can assist us as a whole. Maybe developing one constitution overall that will even govern Canada, is how powerful this constitution should be. Then the elders at my age are even older will have that ease of comfort when you're not here anymore. At least that system will be here for as long as the sun shines, river flows, every grass grows.
Hai stegi vai that's what stago no no that way got me to so when you that to skiono to ni ga ninno o kuma okay wa mi na we sweo o go che ka ni ga na stago ma ka small stegi vai e wa o Lewis no akuma ka kini tau ne wan mo hon Lewis ka ni tau that was my last name, my birth name, and I was raised by layman's. So over the course of time, I legally changed my name to Layman, but my birth name was Lewis. So he's my cousin, brother, same with Wallace over there, relatives, and I'm really glad the work that they're doing. And it's really good to be surrounded by so many experts here. Some of our lawyers, or Indigenous or Nihio lawyers are here, whether they be Nihioak or Indoisino Uesuiok. I'm just gonna quickly take us through the agenda. The poster that you all received, that was the original agenda, but the technical team has made some additions. So the next one on our agenda is gonna be, I think they made a mistake here, they put undrip. Me, I call it can drip, because it's not the real undrip. It's Canada and what they're doing to lessen the original work that many of us worked so hard on. So they're going to be talking about repealing the Indian Act, the action plan, and how that's going to affect our rights as Treaty Number 6 people. Sharon and Janice will be doing that. And then following that, and I'm sure we'll have a Q&A. We'll probably try to get through with that one before lunch. This afternoon, we'll go into the health legislation and other laws that are in the works by the Canadian government, and also the other two governments, Scott Moe and the Cherokee Princess. Oh, I got a hell one time for saying that. One of the elders, I don't know why, said you shouldn't be joking about Cherokee Princess. Well, Ono called herself a Cherokee Princess, and the Cherokees would have nothing to do with her. Then we're going to carry on with laws, legal ancestral warrior society, and that's all these ones that were talked about, along with some additions such as Janice here and other ones that would like to go ahead and take the time to help us out. So Ogama Lewis and Sharon will be introducing the people, and probably they will share with us at that time some of the work that they're doing. I know quite a few of them. I had the opportunity to work with some of them. And then following that, we're going to have treaties 1 to 11. Ogama Lewis, Sharon, and Janice. From our point of view, what took place in Winnipeg. And Eric is here. He'll probably comment on that too. It was a long way to go, and I was a little disappointed. Not more action items were taken care of. When people want to take a trip to go that far, you want things to be happening, especially the issues that are facing us today. And then we're going to talk about Treaty 6 Confederacy, what's happening on the Treaty 6 West side. I'll share that with Sharon. Sometimes I don't know what's happening, although I should. But sometimes I'm kept a little bit in the dark. And then we're going to talk about treaty alliances, Ochi, Sturgeon Lake, and others that are part of the alliance. And I think there are other nations that want to join the alliance too. I know some of our young leaders at home in society are talking about that. And I believe there is an international update too. Sharon will be doing that, and I'll help her out wherever I can. So that's our agenda for today and tomorrow. So without any further delay, we started late. I'm going to ask Sharon and Janice to come up to talk about can drip and how everything around can drip is really affecting us negatively. At the same time, we have a guest here, Bishop Hero. He's here. Couldn't let him listen to us for a little while. We listen to them all the time. And then we'll give an opportunity for him to say a few words this afternoon. And we have interpretation equipment here, don't it?
Interpretation equipment is available.
Oh, my friend is back here, Clarence. So if you want to use the headsets, that way people don't have to repeat themselves. They can speak totally in Cree or English, and my friend there will interpret. I think he must know a little bit of French too. He went and interpreted for the Pope and for some other big shots in Ottawa, so I'm thinking he might know a little bit of French too. Okay, Sharon, so go ahead and get the interpretation equipment over here. I think you'll need to put a deposit. No, I think they just want to make sure that those are returned. They're not cheap. They're very expensive. Their name. At least maybe you'll write down your name and the number of the headset that you have, so that if one goes missing, they know who to ask. And I just want to also acknowledge one of our young leaders that's here, Chief Jacko. Hi, thank you so much for coming, looking around. There might be some counselors, I don't know, but for the leaders that are here, welcome. And we'll make note of the leaders that have joined us today. So we'll start a list. Okay. There's a press release that's being handed out for your information. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon and Janice. And yeah, Tamara is here too. I saw her. Good to see her. Yeah. And of course, my big brother is here, Eric. We'll give him a chance to say a few words also at the right time here. So with that, you all, Sharon and Janice, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. We're going to start with CANDRIP and what CANDRIP is. About 2 years ago, Canada enacted legislation called C-15, which was to implement the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was the United Nations document, except that the legislation in Canada changes a couple of very fundamental components of the UN document. First of all, they changed the definition of Indigenous people, because the United Nations definition is that Indigenous people, and that's an international definition, it was never meant to be used domestically, but from 1972 it said there's a very detailed definition, and it says that Indigenous peoples are those people who are descendant of the people who were there at the time of contact, and that they maintain their rights as nations in the territory that they were always there. And so what Canada has done is that they have taken that definition, well, they've included Métis in the definition, but Métis were not here at the time of contact. They were a result of contact, but they're not here at the time of contact. I'm not just disparaging them, but that's the truth. So they changed the definition. So by changing the definition, they've also changed other parts of the document of the UN declaration. Because see, the UN declaration was supposed to be an international standard. And what they've done is they're making it a Canadian standard. So they're moving it from an international standard into a Canadian standard. And other indigenous peoples around the world are very angry about what's going on because they're being told that they can only go to that level of what Canada's doing. And that, that this is a violation of their rights when we've all worked together on the original declaration, and now it looks like we turned our back on them. And I've been telling people, no, that's not true. Canada did this on their own.
You can
Yeah.
give it to the,
I'm
Scott House when you're over there.
They're domesticating an international standard, that's what Ron said. So they passed this legislation in C-15. The chiefs in Alberta, all the chiefs in Alberta voted to oppose C-15, Canada. They said, no, we're not accepting Canada. And there was letters sent out and they appeared before the standing committee and said, no, they didn't give their consent to this, we don't agree with this. But what Canada has now done is that they have now enacted what they call an action plan to implement C-15, which is implement this legislation. And the most problematic thing about the legislation, or what their action plan says, that they intend to repeal in total the Indian Act of Canada. Means they'll repeal the Indian Act completely. So what happens if the Indian Act gets repealed? Most people that were born after September the 4th, 1951, you are statutory Indians under the Indian Act. Those people that were born before September 4th, 1951 are treaty Indians because we still have treaty payless. So I don't mind admitting I'm a treaty Indian because I was born before September 4th, 1951. All the Indians born after that are under the Indian Act statutory Indians. So when if they repeal the Indian Act tomorrow, all the people who are statutory Indians will lose rights. You will not be able to use your status cards to get medicines, education, housing, and even the right to live on reserved lands, because reserved lands are set aside under the treaty. They're not reserves, they're reserved with a D. Under the treaty, they were created through the treaty payless. That's when they made treaty here. They asked the open mouth, who are your people? And they had the lines line up, and then people were put down, their names were put on these treaty payless. It was those treaty payless that said that they used that to survey the reserved lands. That the problem with the reserved lands, and Mr. Hyman Squaw had a lot of issues about that, which was one of the reasons that he didn't enter into treaty at Fort Pitt here. But anyway, that's another story, but I won't get into that. But if you do away with statutory Indians, technically you are not allowed to live on reserved lands anymore because of treaty lands. The other thing is that in the Indian Act, they have included our reserved lands, because they amended the Indian Act and it says that these lands, these reserved lands, are not going to be included within the Indian Act, but retain the same character as they had before the passage of the legislation. That means that these are our treaty lands, that they didn't change the character of our lands, I mean legally change it. They're still our reserved lands, they're still our area, our lands that we did not share as Skundianok. So we have these in the Indian Act, and about 2015 or 2016, there was a meeting in Niagara Falls, and Caroline Bennett, had this meeting, and she was talking about repealing the Indian Act. And at that time, I was at the meeting. Onion Lake sent me there. Thank you, Onion Lake, giving me that authority to go to this meeting. But she was talking about they're going to repeal the Indian Act. And I said to her at that meeting, we have a lot of issues with the Indian Act. There's no question about that. But we have to deal with three issues. One is the membership, statutory Indians versus treaty Indians. We need to deal with the issue of lands, and we need to deal with tax exemption. Because right now you're tax exempt on reserved lands. If you repeal the Indian Act tomorrow, you will not have tax exemption. So what I recommended to her in 2016 in Niagara Falls, I said to her, let's take those lands, our reserved lands, and let's put them under the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations, and they will hold those lands in trust for our treaty peoples. And she was sitting across the table from me, and she flung her hands up like this, and she said to me, oh, Sharon, I don't think we need to do that. And I said, oh, yes, Minister, because we don't trust Canada. Needless to say, I haven't been invited to another meeting with them about this, but these are three major issues within the Indian Act that we need to deal with, because this is going to dramatically impact our treaties. Because without the land, recognized land base, where are we going to have our government? Where are we going to have our schools? Where are we going to have our future generations? So this is a big issue. So they're saying repeal the Indian Act completely. And so when this came out on the 21st of June, thank you Canada, on Indigenous Day they released it. So-called Indigenous Day, they released this. One of the chiefs phoned me and said to me, Sharon, what does this mean? What's the legislation going to look like? And I said, it could be one line in a document, it could be in another document, that they're passing a lot of legislation saying repeal this, change the Environment Standards Act, or the Climate Change Act, or whatever. It could be in any act, and it could be one line saying the revised statutes of Canada 1984 or whatever, 1970. I can't remember what the revised statute is that this act is repealed in total. Omnibus legislation. So it would be in one of those legislations, there would be one line, and that's it. So the problem that we have as treaty people, because Canada has spent a lot of time, spent a lot of money, and I was at a youth conference this spring in Enoch, and they had these little sticky things that they were giving out to the youth at this conference, and it said, burn sweetgrass, burn sage, burn the Indian Act. This is what they were handing out to our young people at this youth conference. And I said to the youth, no, don't take that, because you say burn the Indian Act, that means you are saying I will no longer legally exist within Canada. That's what it means. So I was just in Geneva at the beginning of August. Thank you, Onion Lake, for sending me. And I was there, and there was the government of Uruguay, which is in South America, was there appearing before the Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And I don't remember if you remember Dr. Amir Kenya, the guy that was from the UN that was frozen, and somebody made him a Pendleton jacket, and he was really cold, and that was in June. Anyway, Dr. Amir is on CERT. The Uruguayan government said to those people, the indigenous peoples, there are no indigenous peoples in Uruguay, because they are not legally recognized by the Uruguayan government and law. And there was two guys in the room, and they're waving, and they're going, we're here, and they said, yeah, but we don't legally recognize you. That's what's going to happen to us if we're not careful. So we have to construct a lobby to try to explain to these people in Ottawa why repealing those Indian Act totally is a violation of our treaties. But we have to explain why this is a violation of our treaties. Because what they're already saying is that this Indian Act is racist legislation, which, they are, like it identifies Indians, but it's racist legislation, and so are you Indians supporting racism? That's what it's going to come back to us. So we need to have a well-planned strategy as to how we're going to deal with this. And this to me is a very urgent issue, because Parliament is resuming on the 20th of this month. It's like, 13 days away from now. And we really wasted, I'm sorry to say this, we wasted the meeting in Winnipeg, the treaties 1 to 11. because they did not want to discuss this issue. Actually, when we raised it at the meeting, they said that there are some good people in Ottawa, and we should be, we should not be afraid to meet with them. So, but they don't get the treaty. They don't get it. And this is a major issue that we have not only amongst our people that don't understand the treaty, but the non-Indigenous peoples don't understand the treaty. And so they don't see that repealing the Indian Act, which they think is a good idea, everybody will be equal. Everybody will be equal, which is what they said in 1969 with the white paper. Everybody will be equal. That means that we lose our rights as treaty people. That's what it means at the end of the day. And that's something that we really need to discuss. We need to really think about how we're going to approach this and how we're going to have a strategy going forward. This is what we wanted to discuss in Winnipeg, but they didn't want us to talk about it. Mainly because I think a lot of people that were in Winnipeg are supporting to get rid of the Indian Act and have been involved in committees that are drafting legislation to do all kinds of other things. But this is something that Cantrip, and there's a can drip, means that they're eroding our rights. And they're using their legislative base to do that. And so I just want to make one more comment. When we went to court in England in 1981 about the treaties and the Constitution of Canada, because Pierre Trudeau was bringing the Constitution from England, we went to court because we wanted to protect the treaties. And before the Constitution came from England, the Court of Appeal, Lord Denning, said that the treaties are as good as the day they were made. That the treaties were made with the Crown in right of Great Britain. Now it will be the Crown and right of Canada, but it's still the Crown. And no Parliament can do anything to lessen those treaty obligations. No Parliament can do anything. So what Parliament is doing is using their legal system to undermine and destroy the treaty relationship, which is what Trudeau said, Pierre Trudeau, Papa Trudeau, said in 1969, that no people should have a treaty with people within the same country. And that's what they're doing here. They want to get rid of the treaties, that everybody will be the same, we'll all be equal, and we'll all be good Canadian citizens, and let's just move on with things. That's what they're planning to do with this Cantrip action plan, which is why it's so dangerous. And it came out on the 21st of June, just before summer holidays, just before everything. And so you see there was a press release that was sent out on the 20th, because we had a free copy of the action plan. I won't tell you how I got it, but it appeared in my email one day. And so we're able to analyze it before the 21st. So this press release went out with a number of nations who signed on to, as many as we could get to sign on to it. You can see at the back the logos of those that signed on. Yeah, these are the just signed on. Yeah. Ron's looking to see what signed on. Yeah. So what we did is we preempted the UN declaration or the action plan and put out a press release. And then on the 1st of July, there was a demonstration at the Treaty 6 monument in front of the legislature in Alberta, Edmonton, against the action plan. So there's things that we've been trying to do, but this is a really important issue that treaty people should be really concerned about. And I told somebody the other day, well, I'm a treaty Indian. I was born before September 4th, 1951. So I'm okay, I don't have to worry. I'm a treaty Indian, but you guys who are not treaty Indians, you better worry. And they said, well, you have to think about us too. And I said, why? Are you thinking about me? Anyway, but that's how people are thinking about it. Like, forget about it, we're worrying about it. But this is a really big issue, because in the future, our people will not be recognized, and that's what's really dangerous. Really dangerous. And we need to do something about it. Somebody told me they wanted to set up a roadblock somewhere, but anyway, but you can't do that in Alberta because there's a $25,000 fine for setting up roadblocks. interfere with infrastructure unless you're a trucker and you can do anything you want. So, here's how it looks next year.
Thanks, Sharon, for the update. I just want to take a couple steps back and speak to how this declaration came to be on the agenda to be implemented amongst governments. Actually, all four of us were a part of what was called, and is still called, the North American Indigenous Peoples Caucus. And I was the co-chair for about 3 years. And then Tamara was the co-chair after I was the co-chair for the northern side of the medicine line. And we started to hear this conversation about the UN wanting some type of framework or plan to direct governments throughout the world to implement this declaration. And we had, Sharon wasn't there, but me and Ron had attended this meeting in Norway. I think it was about in 2017 and 18. And out of all of the regions within the world, I co-chaired the North American caucus that time. And it was a really difficult conversation because we had people with all different kind of interests that some wanted to participate in moving this forward and others didn't. And we had some really challenging conversations that lasted until like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were the only region throughout the whole world that put a pause and put a place marker to say, if we agree to support the declaration for the UN to develop a framework to implement the declaration within governments, there's a potential for our rights to be domesticated. And the North American caucus at the time had put out press releases to oppose that initiative from happening. And it was really hard discussions, and Ron can attest to how difficult these conversations were. And so we put that place marker there, knowing that in the future, this could potentially come up. And at least if we showed that the North American caucus was opposing the state-led government agenda to initiate a framework that would then be implemented throughout the other regions in the world, at least we protected our people. So that's what we did. And not long after, I mean, without going into all these details, not long after, they came out with what was referred to as a system-wide action plan. And this system-wide action plan that was passed by the UN was done so without the consent of all of the regions of the world. And this is what Canada refers to and relies on to say that now we have this, even the UN is saying that we need to implement the declaration and put it into legislation nationally. So I wanted people to know the background to that, because then after I left as co-chair, Tamara took over as co-chair. And there were some things that were happening after that. Like the government has been trying to, and I say the government, Canada and the US government, were trying to meddle in the sovereign approach that we were trying to put forward at the international level. And we had to do a lot of advocating at that level to try and put protective place markers in place to ensure that there would not, that whatever happens, we'd be able to go back and say, we didn't agree with these things because we didn't. And there are press releases that say that. So bringing that forward to today now, Sharon has already gone through some of the substantive content of how we got here today, but you have to remember that when these initiatives happen to develop and bring forward new laws that are about us, that impact us, most of the time, they're not, well, most all of the time, it's done without our input, our consent, despite the fact that a lot of times government refers to language as co-development. But co-development is just a code word for giving them permission to do whatever they want because they manufacture our consent through the use of organizations to get our input into these processes, which is always predetermined by the time before we even get to the meetings. So all this to say, we were incredibly concerned when we heard that this document was going to come out, that within the document it identified repealing the Indian Act. If you want to see the document for yourself, it is published online and it is available. And within the document, it does say to repeal the Indian Act and to work on processes, legislative and other mechanisms, that's the language they use, legislative and other mechanisms to be developed in the next couple years to replace the Indian Act. And so we are at a critical juncture within our history where we're seeing the duplication of what happened to what would be my grandparents' generation from the 1969 onward, parents, grandparents' generation. And the thing is everything that happened back then is happening now. It's in their documents. The transfer of services that's happening is it's already in legislation in a 2019 law called the Indigenous Services Act. And it already identifies the transfer of services to either Indigenous organizations or other entities, and that's already happening. And so there's all these things that are happening, and we do not necessarily have a coordinated strategy that we need to think about. I think because a lot of our people don't understand what's happening, the urgency of this, and the generational impacts to come if we don't have a strategy. So what we did as technicians was we kind of raised the alarm about 2 weeks before June 21st, and we came together to talk about what we could do urgently and then in the long term in terms of how to address what is coming. So we put together, the first thing that we did, actually Sharon did the first thing, which was convene a meeting amongst us to start talking about this and to discuss the urgency. A letter to the king was drafted. Onion Lake had sent off that letter to the king. And then we talked about the need to have some type of action. So this press release was developed and sent out. Then there was the day of action on July 1st. The other piece that is more long-term, which involves us and the laws, some of the laws group, is we're working on a comprehensive analysis to look at what the impacts, implications of this draft action plan are to the nations through a treaty lens and a treaty analysis. Because the challenge in doing this kind of work sometimes when you engage with mainstream non-Indigenous lawyers or law firms is they don't understand treaty. So you're not going to get a fulsome perspective of what the impact to our treaty is through an international lens. So we're working on that. And then we also started to develop a website to house all this information. And that was actually led by a couple technicians, Jeannie, Paul, and I can't remember the other guy's name from Alexander. So they've been doing that. But because everything happened so quickly, we haven't been able to pick this up again. And that's kind of where we're at in terms of strategy wise, but we need to figure out how we are going to deal with the membership, the lands, and like the legal political pieces. And that needs to come to the chiefs level. The people need to know so that you can ask the chiefs what is happening and they get motivated to do something to respond. This is why it's incredibly important to have grassroots involvement in this. Because people are not understanding that this is the white paper 2.0. This is. They may call it something else, but it is in black and white, and it's the same thing that happened in 1969 and 1970. And the difference back then to what's happening today is our people were incredibly motivated to act and to take action back then because and the chiefs took action back then. But the challenge we have now is what we saw in Winnipeg is a majority of the nations and unfortunately the leadership have bought into processes that have been determined, that have been created by the Crown. And I'm just going to be blunt and say those are things like the First Nations Land Management Act regime processes, the 10-year grant, and the new comprehensive funding agreement things. All of these things work together as a puzzle to create a termination framework that collectively work together to get rid of the treaty. So that's all I want to say about where we're at. I will say that in ending my piece to this, that Mount Lewis and Onion Lake did submit a written response to the Senate committee on C-15 because we knew what was happening. And I want to say that we saw the domestication strategy in this. And actually, I wrote the response to that, and I used a lot of Tamara's work on genocide because she did a lot of research on genocide to show that Canada, even for like in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, when there was changes happening to the criminal code around genocide, which I'll get her to talk to after, they domesticated the genocide convention within the criminal code. And so I use that to say, Canada has been doing this for decades. Who's to say, we already know what their agenda is and what their strategy is. They've already done this. They're gonna do the same thing with this other international document. And so that's what we put in the response. And that's on the record. It's available online. And that's where we're at with this work, which means we still have some work to do, and we need you as people attending these meetings to understand the situation and go back and talk to your leadership about what's happening.
I'm going to turn it over to Tamara, but before I do, I was in New York when Bennett and when Wilson Raybould came to the permanent forum, and it was then I think both of them made this comment. They said, "Well, we're going to adopt the UN Declaration without reservation." But in the very next sentence, the minister said, "However, we're going to do it so that it conforms to Canada's laws." So unless you really listen to a statement like that and you don't know the situation, it just goes right over your head, because nobody really responded to it. So on one hand, she said without any reservation, and then in the next instance, she said it's gotta conform to Canada's laws. That's double talk, you know? And it was very unfortunate what happened that time. But I'm gonna turn it over to Tamara to speak on this issue. Go ahead.
That's it. My name is Tamara Starblanket. I'm from Taco Creek in Treaty 6. I wasn't expecting to speak here at all, so I will talk, I guess, a little bit about what the findings in the legal research that was undertaken. And so very briefly, the legal issue in that document looks at whether the Canadian state is guilty or culpable for crimes of genocide, and whether the Canadian state violates international laws on genocide. So customary treaty law, meaning like the genocide convention that they signed on to, etc. And so, in a nutshell, I guess after 7 years of writing, it was demonstrated that indeed the Canadian state is guilty for crimes of genocide. They violate Article B, causing serious embodied and mental distractions against members of that human group, and also forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And so it showed in the work that Canada had this specific intent, the intent to they use the word harm, language like that, but pretty much to destroy our people and destroy our people collectively is what I mean, not individually, but the collective, because the only human groups are protected under the Genocide Convention. And so when we talk about human groups, I mean like our I'm saying it right, the original nations and peoples on this continent. And so, as children, our children, we depend on our children, and our children depend on us. First of all, on us to properly raise them up, traditionally, culturally, spiritually, with the language and all of that. And but also, we also depend on our children to transmit who we are into the future. And what I hear in this meeting is a lot of that coming to pass. But the fact that there's a concept that is talked about to actually describe the destruction that Indigenous that our children experience in those residential schools. And I wasn't the first one that actually said that. It was I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say his name, but an elder from Muscogee had talked about this idea of brainwashing. And his concern was that young people don't think and speak in or talk in Cree. And I'm one of them actually. But and then he talked about in that treaty meeting, he talked about that being a genocide. He said that that's a genocide. And so it's really important to this because what Sharon and Janice have talked about is that the state benefits from the conditions that they caused against Indigenous peoples, our people, collectively, because there's not a lot of young people that understand the importance of the treaty relationship. That they don't understand, why would it be important to talk about the things that are being addressed today? For example, the example that Sharon gave at that meeting with, Burn the Indian Act, and that and if I may say it in a gentle way, but you can't really say it in a gentle way, that, it's, talk about using the manufactured consent. But the people that are putting this forward, are forcibly indoctrinated, if I can say it that way, and what's happening is that we're not living and breathing and, breathing these traditions into our lives and who we are as free people. And so part of that, part of that legal argument that was made in that book also that looks at Canada's implementation of genocide in the criminal code of Canada. And so what Canada did with that was they ratified it in 1952, and in 1970 was when they finally implemented the genocide convention, but they call it hate propaganda, which really talk about Canada can't pick and choose which elements of international law will apply to it. And that's what they did. And just for, to support the example that Janice gave, that's exactly what they're doing here. Like I said, I wasn't expecting to say anything here at all except this afternoon or this morning. But I do want to talk a little bit about what that work in Suffer the Little Children talks about. I want to share too that it was defended as a Master of Laws dissertation, and so part of that process was getting the committee at the law school to agree to some of the fundamental legal arguments and claims that were being made in the work. And so basically, what happened at the end of that 7-year period was that they couldn't deny anymore that what we've collectively experienced is genocide. And some years ago, we did a presentation called "Assimilation is Genocide," and that was in 2010 at hopefully I'm saying the right, Treaty Board, and in there when that presentation was made, couldn't really prove it then, but I feel that we can prove it now, that assimilation actually is genocide. Genocide is genocide, no matter what form it takes and no matter what you call it, and that's actually a quote by Sheridan. So some of the stuff I've actually memorized, but I just think it's really important that what we're facing here, if I can say it, can't really say this in a gentle way. What I feel is that this is genocide that we're experiencing. We don't have to physically disappear or be wiped off the earth for that to happen. That it's happening right in front of us. And some of the things that the previous speakers talked about, the land, well, we're nothing without the land. And that's what that residential school system was all about. And the child welfare system, and it's about removing us and isolating us, separating us from our land. So, hi.
Sharon has some supplementary.
It should be coming along pretty
I
quick.
just want to talk about the lobby that we're going to have to. If we're going to do this and fight for our children in the future, we have to mount the lobby both domestically and internationally. But I was at the Assembly of First Nations meeting in Halifax, and the AFN people, Alberta doesn't have a regional chief. They're not part of the AFN structure, but everybody else has a regional chief. There's one in Saskatchewan. It's the head of the FSIN. The regional chiefs in the AFN have agreed with the action plan. They've agreed to it. And the AFN gave Jody Wilson-Rayburn, who's going to probably be the next national chief of the AFN, they gave her 40 minutes on the last day of the assembly to sell the action plan. 40 minutes. And they were telling everybody else, you got 15 minutes to talk about water, you got 15 minutes to talk about this, you got 15 minutes to talk about policing. They had all these restrictions on time limits. But then when it came down to the action plan, they gave her 40 minutes. And the regional chief from British Columbia said that they were proud, he was proud as part of the AFN to have been involved in the drafting of the action plan with Canada. So they talked, so the regional chiefs, other than Alberta, were involved in this. So my understanding is that they cut the regional chief out of the Northwest Territories and the Yukon from any discussion because they were against it. So they just went ahead and approved it without them being involved. This is one of the big fights we're gonna have, is to climb over the top of these people who are gonna be sitting out front supporting Canada and promoting Canada's position. And so you need to know that this is part of the fight that we're gonna encounter, is we're gonna be going against our own people, who have been adopting this agenda. And so within Alberta, there is no regional chief, so that's not an issue in Alberta, but it is an issue here. It's an issue in Ontario, Manitoba, and all these other places with these regional chiefs, because they were involved with Canada. They're probably gonna deny it, but this is what they said at the meeting. I was there listening to it. So this is something we're gonna have to think about, like in planning the strategy. Onion Lake is not part of AFN. There's a lot of nations who are not part of AFN who can stand back and say, well, we're not part of AFN, we're not caught by them, so that you have a right to speak out. But this is something that people have to really be aware of as in planning the strategy. Oh, Vern's telling me to
I thank you very much, to the ladies here for the good information that they're sharing with us. And I guess it's up to us, but we're gonna, the food is on the way, so we're gonna have a few minutes for question and answer here. So if you wanna ask a question, I don't know if we have a cordless. I'm not sure. Vern, do we have a cordless? Okay, we have one. But one thing I was thinking about, and is it would be a good idea maybe to pass a paper around and have people put their email addresses on there. That way, the actions that are forthcoming from this meeting will be shared with you. There'll probably be a very concise summary of action from this meeting. So that'll be shared with you. In there will be whatever action we decide to take on this, etc. So if we could do that, that would be good. You could receive the information and the feedback. So I'm going to turn it over. I believe there's a... Okay, for those of you that were dozing off, wake up call. But when you do take the floor, introduce yourself and the nation that you're from, for record purposes. Thank you. Anyway, go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning to all. Holly Johnson, Sigason, Holly Johnson Rattlesnake, Samson Cree Nation Otania, Yotinsko, Sigason, Magaya, Ginaskum now, my epe, Mamskotige, Mota, Magaya, Notato Anaya. I remember in 1980, Dr. Chief Wilton Littlechild brought to my attention, I was only like 16 XP. But he talked about how the Canadian government was recognizing AFN, and this is in the 80s, and we're in 2023. And and when I think and reflect on that, I thought, well, how come nothing's been done for the last 40 years? Because I truly believe that AFN don't speak for us. And I don't think that government should take a position that they are the representative of all First Nations. when in fact, and this is my view, this is my personal view, that AFN, the majority of the people that are representing there are not treaty, and that would be the BC nations. And so it just doesn't make sense. So what are we doing as peoples to fight the government and to not sit back and concede to their decisions? I think too many times First Nations take that position, and we talked about genocide, you know, and we take those roles on, and we take these Indian government, Indian Act roles on as chief and council. You know, for some of you, you probably are well aware that our leadership was not about popularity. We had purpose for our people. And it was our matriarch that helped in developing those people to be the leaders of those nations. It wasn't a popularity vote. It was Indian Act that brought on popularity vote. And really, like, I'm sorry if I'm going to speak bluntly, and I'm sorry if I'm going to offend anybody, but it's not about the popularity. You really have to have your heart in doing something for the people. And when I talk people, we're a collective. We're Treaty 6. And this is what we need to do. Don't be micromanaging back at your band office. That's not your role. As leaders, we should be fighting the big, like Sharon said. We need to have an action plan domestically and internationally. We have tools now that can assist us. And you know, I was involved with this war, or not a war, but a woman's organization. And the United Nations Declaration, or the United Nations have made given some directives to states about women involved in violence. And you know, when I read through those articles, I was like, Canada hasn't even done anything or acted on this. And what we learned was it's up to us to get the government to act on a lot of those articles. And so we need to go there as leaders that are here and present. We need to go there. And as Nehiawak Kiano, Uskaya Gangi Kape, Kapeks Nahamoya, Kiko Ayama, Gigana Phone. It's not about popularity. It's about popularity. And so it's up to us as elders. I don't consider myself an elder, but I'm getting there. I'm learning. But it's up to us. I do consider myself a matriarch, and I do have a role as a matriarch that I need to educate the younger generations. And I think each and every one of us has to take on that role. But my point here is that we need to develop an action plan, and let's stick to it, but we need to be a collective. Never mind, you know, Mr. Toman Pe Tenaya, Igo Moema, Mi Wisetsk, Icenoak, Pugamego, Yotin, put it to the wind. Kawigate taego, Kamayata, Pugam Kape Mamopia, Kabe Mamopaya, Kanut Naya, Koko, Wapskiwias, Exe Hai Hai.
Hi, and I believe you, I think I was about 15 in 1982. Okay, the lunch is here. We want to get to it while it's still hot, but I'll take one more. Lady that raised her hand over there, introduce yourself, your nation, etc.
Good morning, my name is Councillor Rosalind Gutzwilmer. I'm from Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation in Alberta. I'd like to thank the elders for the prayer this morning. Thank you very much for starting us off in a good way. And I'd like to thank Okinawa Lewis and his council for inviting us here. We met them in Manitoba, and we've been following them for a while because we're just so impressed with the processes they're following. And we've met with Sharon and Janice and Tamara, and just wonderful, like the things we're learning and the things we want to implement. they're huge. We have a big fight against the government of Canada. I have some questions on because you guys are really knowledgeable of this, what's our legal recourse? Because there's a definite lack of duty to consult with the sovereign nations at the AFN. We don't endorse them, right? Like, how do we make them accountable? And how do we move forward with that? That's one question. And I just wanted to see what your legal opinion is on the UNDRIP CANDRIP and how they allowed Métis to be included in there when it didn't follow the actual original UNDRIP. Like, have we, is there any legal recourse on that? And how do our nations band together to put Canada into their place to make sure that they follow that? Because it shouldn't be following Canada's laws. They're not our laws. Just like the provinces, they're not our laws. We all signed treaties prior to provinces being developed, right? So there's just so many things that the government puts in place. So how do we put them in I guess, legal recourse? How do we litigate them? Or can we? Is there a possibility? Do we have enough information to band together to either we do it as an individual nation? Because if you have hundreds of nations submitting the same litigation, well, maybe they'll have to look at us. Maybe they'll have to answer to that. And I'd like to thank Tamara on your book on genocide and how it implemented and how it changed how legally the legal standpoint of that. Like, how do we actively pursue the government of Canada in the genocide of our people, right? Because I'm a product of genocide. I don't speak my language. I'm speaking the native tongue of somebody else. My parents and grandparents told me that I can't speak Cree because I have to go to school and be safe, right? Sorry, I'm really emotional because I don't know who I am. Because of the government, because of what they did. We had a residential school on our reserve, and I'm learning my culture. I'm 45 years old, and I'm going to my second swipe today. This is a life that we have to live with. And we see the elders here, how beautiful and how strong and how educated. That's who we need to teach us, right? And I'm thankful to be here, and I'm sorry I'm emotional, but it is an emotional thing to not know who you are as a native, to not speak your language and to not know your culture, because these Muniaos come in and take that from us, right? So we go through a lot, and I appreciate everything that you guys do, and I really want to find a way to fight for our future. My chopons, I know some. I want to teach them, but I don't have that. I need to learn, and I need to learn from you. And we need to band together to be stronger to fight them because we are sovereign. We have that right. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna have the ladies answer this in two parts. And then my apologies, we're gonna break for lunch. Food is nice and hot right now, we don't want to keep it waiting too long. So my apologies for that. Go ahead, whoever's first, Janice.
Thank you. Hello, okay. Thank you for the comments, the questions. I'm just gonna respond to the domestic legal political strategies that I know that we're doing, that we've seen success in. One thing that we've learned, and we saw this coming since 2019, when the Indigenous Services Act was enacted into law, was the need to re-examine our relationships with organizations and tribal councils. And so one thing that we did, and I'm looking to chief and council to see if I can share these things. Yeah, okay. We had to remove ourselves formally through the AFN and FSIN. So what Onion Lake did was they did a community referendum to ask their people about whether or not they wanted to remain within AFN and FSIN. And they said no. And then letters and BCRs were drafted and sent. The other thing that was done, and we are still working on, is the treaty-based funding process for health and education and some of the other departments. Health is further ahead than the rest, but if we're successful in that, the rest of the other areas will have treaty-based funding. Because the thing that people need to know and realize is as long as we're tied to Canada's policies and laws, which are also attached to funding programs and authorities, we will forever be underfunded. Forever. That is their intent. And when I was doing the work in education to look at just how much we were underfunded, it's about 60 to 80%. So think about that and then go back, even 40 years being 80% underfunded for 40 years. How are we able to get up to speed to, teach our children the culture and the language, to just bring them back to a place where they can be Nihiwa, like whole human beings, the way that the Creator intended us to be, without the disruption of the colonial process that the laws intentionally were created to destroy us. So there's that. We know from the Mixu 2 decision, when Mixu Cree challenged the legislation, I think it was Bill C-45, under Harper, they challenged that law for lack of consultation. And what the Supreme Court found under that case was that you can't challenge a law until it's actually enacted. So for this specific situation, the law is enacted, but the action plan has yet to be completed and finished. So we have some time to figure out what our plan is. And I've been really thinking about this. Our ancestors in the 60s, 70s came up with a red paper. We need that. That's what we need. And that red paper needs to respond to a domestic and international strategy and figure out what are we doing with membership, lands, and taxation amidst all these other things. On the membership thing, there was a movement a couple of years ago led by Tutuna to reinstate treaty cards that we once had. That's one response to the membership issue. The lands, we need to develop our own land laws that are from a treaty perspective. And this is the work that the laws group can take up. And the analysis piece that we need to do, I think, is I'm thinking about it as a red paper in response to this, but that's why it requires everybody to know what's happening and for a collective response forward. And if I forgot anything, Sharon will remember.
And I believe while you're speaking, Elder Mary Francois is praying for the food, so yeah, go ahead.
So just briefly on the international part of it, we have a very strong international, both in Geneva and New York. So between Ron Lehman and I, one day I figured out that we have about 88 years of experience, even though he's only 27 and I'm 29, but it's a long story of how we got there. but we know a lot of mechanisms within the UN system that we can use to, challenge what's going on here. Just recently when I was at CERT, the Committee on Racial Discrimination at the beginning of August, I told the members that it's inappropriate for them to now reference the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples in their documentation because Canada is using the UN Declaration against us. And they have to be aware of that, so they have to be careful of how they write their opinions. But already the UN has already said that we have a right to free, prior, and informed consent. That's not an issue, and we can, continue to promote that. But the one thing that we could do that would really put the cat among the pigeons with Canada is to talk to the Committee on Decolonization, the Committee of 24, and to ask the committee to oversee what's going on in Canada, because Canada is violating our international rights. That would really cause a lot of trouble for Canada. Now, I don't know if people want to go that far and do that, but something to consider. So we have options that we're not limited to what we can do. We can meet with the Secretary General. We can ask for a meeting with the Secretary General. The General Assembly begins meeting at the beginning of October in New York, and it might be useful to send a lobby group to New York to talk to members of the UN and let it be known publicly that we are lobbying at that level for different things. So there's options that we can explore. We haven't really sat it down with an international strategy would look like. We still have to talk about that, but there's a lot of things that we can do, and we can get groups writing papers, writing letters on our behalf. And I just want to mention one other thing. When King Charles III had his coronation at the beginning of May, there was a delegation of chiefs that went from Treaty 6 that went to London and actually met with the king. And they, wow, maybe not another minute to talk about this. Anyway, they told the king that there's unfinished treaty business. Going back to 1980-81, before the Constitution came to Canada, there is unfinished treaty business, and they told the king that there was unfinished treaty business, and the king agreed. He said, yes, there are. So we have that option also to think about the revitalizing or reinvigorating the lobby in London that was done in the 80-81 when Ron and I were just children. But anyway, that kind of thing can still be done. So there's a number of avenues that we can look at. We're not dead in the water yet, let's put it that way. But we also can file a complaint at the United Nations about the effect of genocide that was going on. So there's, we have a lot of options. We're not stuck. So you can have that as a lunch break discussion.
Okay, hi. So with that, just ask for your cooperation for a few minutes. Elder Mary Francois from Cold Lake First Nations, Dene, is going to say the prayer for lunch. Go ahead, Mary. You can remain seated. Hi, thank you very much, Mary, Elder Mary Francois. So go ahead, elders, you all need on, help yourselves. And then I know we have some volunteers here, young people. For those that can't really get up and they're not as mobile as they used to be, maybe we can get the young people to fix a plate for the elders. Only those elders that can't help themselves, maybe they have mobility issues. But go ahead and if you only got preciso.